Tomorrow night's 48 Hours Mystery takes a look at a fascinating and frustrating case. 3 murders, an alleged serial killer on the run for nearly 2 decades, and a victim connected to Ashton Kutcher.
The murder happened here in the middle of the night. Someone jumped out of the bushes and stabbed 18-year-old Trisha Piccaccio to death.
I was the one who found her. I woke up when I had a cup of coffee and I was going out to my van. When I saw it was her, I dropped the coffee cup.
I remember just waking up to this blood-curdling scream of my father. Just the second I heard it, I knew something was very badly wrong.
I died right then and there.
Everybody was beside themselves. Why would anybody do something like this?
A friend of the victim's 2 brothers was our immediate suspect. Mike Gargiulo is a very powerful young man, and he flat refused to cooperate with the police. Mike Gargiulo went to California to get out of the scrutiny here in Illinois.
Hollywood Hills, 2001. A 22-year-old believed to be actor Ashton Kutcher's girlfriend is stabbed to death. 2005, a 32-year-old woman is stabbed in her home. 2008, a young woman is woken up by a man attacking her with a knife.
Trisha greatly resembled the other victims here in California.
At this time, no one has been charged in her murder.
My family's been waiting for justice for Trisha's murder for 17 years.
With what we know today, Michael Gargiulo may be a serial killer.
And joining us now is Dr. Doug Piccaccio, Trisha's brother. Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
Your sister's murder has gone unsolved for nearly 18 years now. When did it first become evident to you that Michael Gargiulo was the suspect?
The cold case detectives came out and visited me when I was in my residency in about 2004 and informed me that he was a suspect in a couple of attacks in California and that they had found his DNA at the crime scene of my sister's murder.
You know, I've read reports that there was 2 sides to this guy. There was normal Mike and there was Mad Mike. I know they're kind of labeling him the kind of this boy next door thing, but did you ever suspect at all that he was a suspect or that he could be potentially, I guess, guilty of doing something like this?
I mean, it made sense in hindsight, but at the time, no. I mean, you see this side of this guy. He was a neighborhood kid. Grew up. We were all kids together, and he was familiar with the area and familiar with all the families. You just don't look in your own backyard on some of these things because it was such a shock, and the whole episode was such a mystery to everybody in terms of who would want to attack my sister. She was harmless. She had nothing but friends, and when you look in hindsight, it makes sense because it's such a senseless thing, and clearly Michael has done this several times since. So at the time it was hard to imagine, but it seems to make sense now. Take me through this situation. I know there was a point where the 2 of you were together and he had asked if you found out who killed your sister, would you kill him? What were you thinking was going on now in hindsight in that situation? I thought it was just one of those things a piece of conversation. He wouldn't have been the first person to ask me that. I think people try to get inside our heads in terms of what's going through our minds and how we feel about what happened. And my answer was, and I don't remember if my answer was I would or that I could, but it was an affirmative answer for sure. And I didn't know at the time that he was maybe testing me. We thought that he was probably or likely going to confess. And when I told him, sure, I would or could, but I'd have to get in line with probably every other guy in my family and who was friends with my sister. And I think he took that as a threat, actually. Can you figure out why Chicago law enforcement has not been able to kind of place this, the murder of your sister on Gargiulo? I mean, he's now, I know, going to go on trial in California and could be convicted of other attacks and other killings. I mean, how does that make you feel that he may actually not go to jail for the murder of your sister? We've had the hardest time figuring out why this is happening the way it's happening. They have DNA at the scene. He did not have any contact with her, despite the fact that she had contact with all of her classmates that very night on their senior road rally. So why they haven't pursued this. To me, and being on the inside, it seems somewhat political. I think that they would maybe have to admit that some mistakes were made and reconcile those mistakes. And at times, I think when political careers are involved, it's easier to ignore something that isn't close to them than to actually do the right thing and pursue it.
New details on a Hollywood murder mystery. Could Ashton Kutcher's testimony convict the man accused of killing his ex?
Ashton Kutcher could be an interesting witness for timeline of the Ashley Ellerin case.
It really is a terrifying story. Michael Thomas Gargiulo stands accused of murdering 3 women, including Ashton's then girlfriend. The 22-year-old lived right here behind me in the heart of Hollywood. Now, according to court papers, Ellerin was preparing for a Grammy night party, a date with Ashton, when, according to police, Gargiulo broke into her home and stabbed her more than 47 times. Hey. Ashton was a rising star at the time, hitting it big in the sitcom That 70s Show.
He was picking her up, and he got to the house and knocked on the door, and surprisingly, it was dark. So he decides to peer in this very large window in the front of the house.
He told police when he arrived at approximately 10:45 p.m., he was able to see inside the home where he noted what he thought was a red wine-type stain on the floor. But sadly, it was Ashley's blood.
She's not there, he leaves. And in truth, Ashley Ellerin was lying on the floor, having been murdered, allegedly by Gargiulo. So he can describe time they were supposed to meet, what time did he see the stain, and the sad part is he walked away and her body was in the living room.
Susan Zirinsky is the senior executive producer of 48 Hours. The news magazine's reporting helped connect Gargiulo to a murder in a Chicago cold case.
It wasn't until 48 Hours aired and 2 witnesses came forward that Chicago was able to nail him and charge him with this case.
Gargiulo's pretrial hearing is on March 20th, and he too has a Hollywood connection.
Your name?
Mike Gargiulo.
In 1999, he had a small role as a boxer in a student film. Right now, he's in custody in downtown LA.
This is a real nightmare that I'm living.
He maintained his innocence in a jailhouse interview with 48 Hours.
My truth is being 100% innocent, being wrongfully charged.
Ashton Kutcher answered questions directly and clearly as a prosecutor asked him about the night of February 21st, 2001. Kutcher testified he and 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin were acquaintances. He said when he met her 2 months before her murder at a friend's party, he was dating someone else, and he introduced her to a friend of his. A few weeks later, she invited him to a housewarming party at her Hollywood home. He'd broken up with his girlfriend, and she wasn't seeing anyone, so he testified he later asked her if she would like to go out for dinner and drinks on what would turn out to be the last day of her life. Kutcher said he was late getting to Ellerin's house to pick her up that night because he'd been at a friend's house for a Grammy-watching party. I saw the lights were on, so I assumed she was home. I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I knocked again, and once again, no answer. I looked through the window on the front door, didn't see anything, and at this point, I pretty well assumed she left for the night, and I was late, and she was upset and went out with her friend. Kutcher testified he wanted to make sure she wasn't home. I went to leave, and as I was leaving, I looked through this window. He pointed to a window to the left of the front door. I just thought it was odd. Lights were on, and she left. But I looked through the window. When I looked through, it looked like the place was a little bit of a mess, but I knew she'd just been moving in. I saw what I thought was red wine spilled on the carpet, but that was also not all that alarming. I'd been at a party at her house a week ago. There had been a lot of people who were drinking. Kutcher testified he got in his Range Rover and drove home, figuring Ashley had gone out with a friend. Prosecutors say the red stains Kutcher saw on Ellerin's carpet was a trail of blood left by her killer. Her body was discovered the next morning outside of her bathroom. She'd been stabbed 47 times. Kutcher testified when he found out about her murder the next morning, "My fingerprints were on the door. I was freaking out." He said he immediately called police. All in all, Ashton Kutcher was actually on the stand for a total of about 20 minutes.
It is an honor to be here. As a young man raised and brought up in the public school system, I pledge my allegiance to that flag every single day. And the honor maybe one of the greatest honors of my life today is to be here and leverage the work that I've done as testimony that may in some way benefit this nation that I love. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Chairman Corker for your leadership in this endeavor, and to Senator Cardin. Your leadership has been extraordinary, and I'd like to also say thank you to the rest of the committee that has supported this effort. This is a bipartisan effort, and in a country that is riddled with bipartisan separation on so many things, slavery seems to come up as one of these issues that we can all agree upon. And I applaud you for your agreement, and I believe in you and your leadership and your ability to take us out of it. I'm here today to defend the right to pursue happiness. It's a simple notion, the right to pursue happiness. It's bestowed upon all of us by our Constitution. Every citizen of this country has the right to pursue it. And I believe that it is incumbent upon us as citizens of this nation, as Americans, to bestow that right upon others, upon each other, and upon the rest of the world. But the right to pursue happiness for so many is stripped away. It's raped. It's abused. It's taken by force, fraud, or coercion. It is sold for the momentary happiness of another. Now, this is about the time when I start talking about politics that the internet trolls tell me to stick to my day job. So I'd like to talk about my day job. My day job is as the chairman and the co-founder of Thorn. We build software to fight human trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. And that's our core mission. My other day job is that of the father of two, a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old. And as part of that job that I take very seriously, I believe that it is my effort to defend their right to pursue happiness and to ensure a society and government that defends it as well. As part of my anti-trafficking work, I've met victims in Russia. I've met victims in India. I've met victims that have been trafficked from Mexico, victims in New York and New Jersey and all across our country. I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see. I've seen video content of a child that's the same age as mine being raped by an American man that was a sex tourist in Cambodia. And this child was so conditioned by her environment that she thought she was engaging in play. I've been on the other end of a phone call from my team asking for my help because we had received a call from the Department of Homeland Security telling us that a 7-year-old girl was being sexually abused, and that content was being spread around the dark web. And she had been being abused, and they'd watched her for 3 years, and they could not find the perpetrator, asking us for help. We were the last line of defense. An actor and his foundation were the potential last line of defense. That's my day job, and I'm sticking to it. I'd like to tell you a story about a 15-year-old girl in Oakland. We'll call her Amy. Amy met a man online, started talking to him. A short while later, they met in person. Within hours, Amy was abused, raped, and forced into trafficking. She was sold for sex. This isn't an isolated incident. There's not much that's unusual about it. The only unusual thing is that Amy was found and returned to her family within 3 days using the software that we created, a tool called Spotlight. And in an effort to protect its capacity over time, I won't give much detail about what it does, but it's a tool that can be used by law enforcement to prioritize their caseload. It's a neural net. It gets smarter over time. It gets better and it gets more efficient as people use it. And it's working. In 6 months, with 25% of our users reporting, we've identified over 6,000 trafficking victims, 2,000 of which are minors. This tool is in the hands of 4,000 law enforcement officials and 900 agencies. And we're reducing the investigation time by 60%. This tool is effective, it's efficient, it's nimble, it's better, it's smarter. Now, there's often a misconception about technology that in some way it is the generator of some evil, that it's creating job displacement, and that it enables violence and malice acts. But as an entrepreneur and as a venture capitalist in the technology field, I see technology as simply a tool without will. The will is the user of that technology, and I think it's an important distinction. An airplane is a tool. It's a piece of technology, and under the right hands, it's used for mass global transit, and under the wrong hands, it can be flown into buildings. Technology can be used to enable slavery, but it can also be used to disable slavery, and that's what we're doing. I alluded to a phone call that we got from the Department of Homeland Security about this girl that was being trafficked on the dark web. Now, it's interesting to note that the dark web was created in the mid-90s. It was a tool that was created by the Naval Research Lab called Tor. A tool with absolute purpose and positive intention for sharing intelligence communications anonymously. It's also been used to help people who are being disenfranchised by their government within political dissent in oppressive regimes. But on the other side, it's used for trafficking. For drug trafficking, for weapons trafficking, and for human trafficking. And it's also the warehouse for some of the most offensive child abuse images in the world. Now, when the Department of Homeland Security called us and asked for our help and asked if we had a tool, I had to say no. And it devastated me. It haunted me. Because for the next 3 months, I had to go to sleep every night and think about that little girl that was still being abused. And the fact that if I built the right thing, we could save her. So that's what we did. And now, if I got that phone call from Greg, wherever you're at, the answer would be yes. We've taken these investigation times of dark web material from 3 years down to what we believe can be 3 weeks. The tool is called Solus. Once again, I won't go into too much detail about the tool, but it's being used by 40 agencies across the world today in beta, and we believe that it's going to yield extraordinary results. And just like Spotlight, it gets smarter and more efficient and more cost-effective over time. So where do we go from here? What do we need? Obviously, we need money. We need financing in order to build these tools. Technology is expensive to build, but the beauty of technology is once you build the warehouse, it gets more efficient and more cost-effective over time. I might be able to present to you a government initiative where next year I come back and ask for less. And to me, that's like, it seems extraordinary. The technology we're building is efficient, it works, it's nimble, because traffickers change their modus operandi, and we can change ours as well, just as efficiently, if not more efficiently, as they can. It's enduring, and it only gets smarter with time. We also are collecting data. We have KPIs. We actually understand that if we're delivering value, we increase our efforts in that area. If we're not delivering value, we shut it down. And it's a quantifiable solution. One of my mentors told me, don't go after this issue if you can't come up with a quantifiable solution. We can quantify it, and we can make the work that we're doing and the initiatives that you put forth accountable. My second recommendation is to continue to foster these private-public partnerships. Spotlight was only enabled by the McCain Institution and the full support of Cindy McCain and a man that I find to be not only a war hero, but a hero to this issue, John McCain. It wasn't just created by them. There was extraordinary support from the private sector. Company Digital Reasoning out of Tennessee stepped up to the plate. They offered us effort, they offered us engineers, they offered us support and pro bono work. We've had the support of companies that oftentimes war with each other, from Google to Microsoft, to AWS to Facebook. And some of our other technology initiatives include many, many other private companies. It's vital to our success. These private-public partnerships are the key. The third thing I'd like to highlight is the pipeline. You know, we sit at the intersection of discovery of these victims, but the pipeline in and the pipeline out are just as vital and just as important, and addressing them are just as important. I'd like to highlight one thing in particular, that being the foster care system. There are 500,000 kids in foster care today. I was astonished to find out that 70% of the inmates in the prison across this country have touched the foster care system, and 80% of the people on death row were at some point in time exposed to the foster care system. 50% of these kids will not graduate high school, and 95% of them will not get a college degree. But the most staggering statistic that I found was that foster care children are 4 times more likely to be exposed to sexual abuse. That's a breeding ground for trafficking. I promise you that's a breeding ground for trafficking. But the reason I looked at foster care is that it's a microcosm. It's a sample set that we have pretty extraordinary data around to date, even though we can't seem to fix it. It's a microcosm for what happens when displacement happens abroad as the unintended consequences of our actions or inactions in the rest of the world. When people are left out, when they're neglected, when they're not supported, and when they're not given the love that they need to grow, it becomes an incubator for trafficking. And this refugee crisis, if we want to be serious about ending slavery, we cannot ignore it, and we cannot ignore our support for this issue in that space, because otherwise we're going to deal with it for years to come. The outbound pipeline. There's just not enough beds. The bottom line is, once someone is exposed to this level of abuse, it's a mental health issue. And there aren't enough beds, there's not enough support, and we have to have the resources on the other side. Otherwise, the recidivism rates are through the roof. It's astonishing, because when Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met, people resort to survival, and if this is their means of survival and the only source of love that they have in their life, that's what they go for. So we have to address the pipeline out, and we have to create support systems on the other end. It's not an entitlement, it's a demand to end slavery. My fourth and final recommendation is the bifurcation of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. They're both aberrations, they're both awful. They're both slavery, and they're both punitive, in fact. But the solution sets are highly differentiated. When you look at sex trafficking, a victim is most often present at the incident of commerce. And this provides an opportunity for drastic intervention. Whereas in labor trafficking, the victims are being hidden behind the manufacturers and the merchandisers. And it requires an entirely different set of legislation and proactivity and enforcement in order to shut it down. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric that's going on in the world right now about job creation in the United States. Well, if we want to create jobs in the United States, I would ask you to consider eliminating slavery from the pipelines of corporations. Because a lot of that slavery is happening abroad. And if we ask those corporations, under extreme pressure, that if you don't change it, you are going to be penalized. And if you don't clean up that pipeline, it's going to mean trouble. And they're forced with two decisions. They can either clean up the pipeline abroad, or they can move the jobs to the United States of America, where they can be regulated and supported. Bringing jobs to America can be the consequence of doing the right thing, or it can be the consequence of doing the wrong thing. But that choice is up to you. Now, it's not lost on me that all of this disruption in our marketplaces is going to have economic backlash. Like, that is not lost on me at all. But I ask you, do you believe that Abraham Lincoln had to consider the economic backlash of shutting down the cotton fields in the South when he shut down slavery? Because I'm sure that weighed on his mind. You know, happiness can be given to no man. It must be earned. It must be earned through generosity and through purpose. But the right to pursue it, the right to pursue it is every man's right. And I beg of you that if you give people the right to pursue it, what you may find in return is happiness for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank